Welcome to the intermediate tutorial, and let's jump right into it. One thing we didn't cover in the previous video was comments. We write comments to help other people understand our code. For example, for this line I can write this prints something else. This helps other people understand what our code is doing. This is a single line comment, but there are also multi-line comments like this. And they're basically ignored by the compiler. It's just like a note to the human reader. Moving on, let's move on to getting input from our users to make our programs more interactive. We can get input from our users by using something called a scanner. And you can create it like this. They're part of something called a library, which is a predefined set of objects that we can use. To import the library automatically in Eclipse, just press Ctrl-Shift-O. And as you can see, it'll automatically import the library, which basically means we can use it. Now we can get input like this. Dot next line. If you see, there's many commands, but right now we'll just use dot next line. So what we can do is say hello. And then we can just do the following. Hi plus name. Basically, reader.next line will take in the input from the reader, and then it'll store it in the variable name, and then we can just print this out. So if I run this, it'll ask for my name. And as you can see, we gave the input to the program, and the program stored it in the variable and outputted it. Let's move on to the methods we talked about in the previous video. We can pass values to methods like so. We can declare variable public static void, and we can pass in a value like string name. Basically, like we declared variables, we can write names right here of the names of the variables we're going to use. And then here we can do this. So here, this line, we can replace it with simply. And now if we run the program, the same logic happens. We can pass as many values as we like to the method. There's no limit to the number of values we can pass. Let's move on to a concept called packages. If you see here, it says default packages. Basically, like method stores lines of code that do similar work. Packages store classes that do similar work. For example, I can create another package by going to new package. I can call this main, and this will store all of the main work of our program. So I can put main class in here, and I can delete this one. And if you notice here, now it says package main at the top to denote which package it is in. We can create another package and call this utilities for side classes that aren't related to the main class, but they help the program. In here we can create another class that can do side work. So you can see packages organize the Java files in our project. Let's move on to the access types you might have seen, such as public. Basically, they control where the variables can be seen. For example, if I do public int and integer, and I go back here, in order to access the secondary class in the main class, we have to create what's called an instance of the class. Think of it as an object of the main class. This is a blueprint, and when we create an instance, we will actually create that object. So we have to do something like this. And then notice the red underline, which means we need to import this. So we just press Ctrl-Shift-O, and we import it from our own project. So if I try to access that variable, and I go to secondary, you can see I can access an integer, and I can set it to a value like this. However, if I change this from public to private, and now I go back, you'll see this turns into a red line because an integer is no longer visible. We will get an error if we try to access it. So from here you can see the difference between public and private. Now there's another one called protected, which basically means that classes in the same package will be able to access this variable, but not a class from a different package. So main class will not be able to access that variable. There's another variable modifier called final. Basically, if we do something like protected final int, and let's make this public, it means that the value is set once and never changed. It's a constant. So if we do final, and by default the convention for final variables are all capital like this. And if I set this to 5, and if I try to change the value, so if I go here and I try to change the value, you'll see that we get an error because the value of the variable is set to be a final one. That means we cannot change it again. Alright, so let's get rid of this to get the error to go away. Now if you want to assign values to the class's variables as soon as the instance of the class is created, we use something called constructors. Basically, we do something like this. We use the same name as the class name. And suppose we have a variable called private int something to set. We can take a value in, and here we can do something called this dot something to set and set a number. Basically, this dot is used to say that a variable from this class. So this is something to set, and we set it to a number. And here you'll see we have an error here now. That's because it requests a value. So we just pass in any random number, let's say 10. So as soon as this class is created, the constructor gets called, and this value is passed in, and this variable is set to this value. Let's move on to another concept called arrays. If you want to store a multiple number of elements in one variable, we use something called arrays. It's similar to variables. We declare it like so. And this will basically store a number of numbers in one variable. We can assign it a value like this. Notice the curly brackets. Or we can leave it unassigned, but we have to create an object of it first by doing so. And the 5 here between the brackets specifies the number of elements in the array. In arrays, the number of elements stays fixed throughout the program. From here, if you want to assign values to the array, we have to do something like this. You'll notice that I'm using 0 between the brackets. That's because arrays begin at 0 and end at -1 the max. So the first element in an array will start at 0 and the last element will be at 4 in this case. Arrays can be combined with a for loop like so. I equal to 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. And we just set the ith value of an array to, let's say, I plus 1. And now if we print out this value, an array at I. Let's get rid of this for now. And if we hit run, you'll see that it starts from 1 to 5. The actual values are from 0 to 4, but since we added 1, it'll be from 1 to 5. What if you want to create a list of elements that have different data types and whose size can change? Well, we can use something called vectors, and we can declare it like so. We create an object of the vector class and we press Ctrl-Shift-O to import the vector class in. We can use other data types like array lists or linked lists, but we'll stick to vectors for now as they're a bit easier to use. They work a bit similarly. We can add elements to a vector by doing vec.add1, vec.add2, and we can add different data types like vec.addHello. We can even remove elements. So for example, if I add vec.addNew, and then I can do something like vec.removeNew, which will remove the first occurrence of this element. I can combine this with a for loop like so. For int I equals 0, I is less than vet.size I plus plus. And we can print out each element of the array by doing vet.get I. And now if we hit run, we'll see that the elements we added got printed out and the new element that we added was removed by this statement. Well, we reached the end of this video. This is not all there is, but with this foundation and with websites like Stack Overflow, you can easily create basic programs or even text-based games. In the next few videos, we'll cover more advanced topics in detail. See you there.